Hello all, this is Jacob White. Today I'm going to be doing a presentation on Emile Durkheim for my Sociology 101 class at Heartland Community College. This video is intended to show the students and my instructor what I've been able to research on Emile Durkheim. Now, to be forewarned, some of this content you will see is familiar to the book we are using this semester, Seeing Sociology, where they were discussing Emile Durkheim. I couldn't really avoid this because a lot of it related to some of the important work we're going to be discussing in this section. So I do apologize, but like I said, it would be very hard to avoid this at all. So why was Durkheim so important? Or really more specifically, what work or ideas did Durkheim have that were so important to society and sociology? Well, there was many different works he had, but the most notable one I would say is Suicide, a Study in Sociology. And this is a book that is still very important, the ideas discussed in it, where Durkheim was able to discuss and will really discuss the different rates of suicide during industrialization, and he saw different patterns that were occurring in suicide rates. So, for example, there were higher rates in men versus women, single versus married, without kids versus with kids, at peace times versus at war times. There were others, but just by looking at these examples, can you guys see a pattern or something that might relate somehow? Well, initially you might not, but the one I see clearly here is strong relationship versus weak relationship. So these people in this, they had a relationship, or really they had a purpose in some case, where, without having a purpose could be depressing. Single versus married, for example, you have a relationship when you're married versus when you're single. It can be depressing, and it can be hard to find a purpose when you have no kids to raise to show them, versus with kids, or without kids versus with kids. So Durkheim was able to discover through all his different studies on suicide that this was a social issue, not a personal problem. So somebody looking at a person who killed themselves would say, that person had issues, he didn't deal with them, that was his problem, really. And Durkheim was able to kind of take a step back and look at this through sociological studies and perspectives to see that this was occurring all over the place. It was not just one individual here and there that was doing it. So he was able to conclude that it was a social issue. And what more, Durkheim had 4 different types of suicide reasons or suicide purposes that he discovered, types really: egoistic, altruistic, economic, and fatalistic. Egoistic is what you can see above. So this is weak versus strong relationship. Single versus married, for example. Somebody will be depressed being single versus married. I discussed this above, so you guys will see this stuff in the book, so I'm not going to really go into detail on too much of these types of suicide. It's in Module 1.4. So anomic, we will have some idea of Durkheim's that we will discuss a little later on. So what perspective did Durkheim have? Well, I hope you kind of got this from reading the information on Durkheim in the book, but in case you didn't, he had a functionalist perspective. His perspective was functionalism, where it related to a lot of his work, and I'll talk a little more about that next. But just to recap on what functionalism is, it's a view of society is a system of interrelated parts where no one part can function without the others. One part's change can affect the others. So if you look at society back when Durkheim was around, a lot of things were changing. Of course, the industrialization was coming, and 60, 80 years before that, it was a lot more subtle. It was a lot more quiet, and these changes were making a huge effect on everybody in the entire country and how people, what people wanted. It was making a huge change all the way around. And society must adjust to these changes to still function. So a lot of this can be what has to do with suicide in some cases, where people, have to adjust to these changes to still function, and some of them do, and they may later have suicidal thoughts, or some just don't, and that can lead to suicidal thoughts. This was important. This was a very important idea in functionalism. And so you might be wondering why Durkheim had this perspective. and this will be discussed next, but just to let you know, this really relates to what his work was on, functionalism. And really, Durkheim was the first person to have this because it really derived from his work. But we're going to discuss a little bit of this next because some of it has to do with his other ideas, or a lot of it, really. So what important work did he have? Durkheim may have not invented the idea, but he sure was interested in the idea of division of labor. And to recap what that is, it's to work in divisions of separate tasks to improve efficiency. So this really does relate to his view on functionalism, because functionalism is society is working in different parts. Each one has a different part, and they work together to make society succeed. This is kind of the same way, only it's to improve efficiency. So it's really something that does relate, and to an extent, but it's more for, I guess, to improve efficiency would be more for industry. So, of course, Durkheim was interested in solidarity. So, like I said, this stuff was kind of covered in the book, Module 1.3 on Durkheim. But just to recap, solidarity is the social ties that kind of keep everybody together in one society, working as a whole. So mechanical solidarity, this is where you have people in one society that share the same ideas, share the same beliefs, work ethics, generalizations, things like that. They rely on themselves for their own needs. For example, people may rely in a society on the same beliefs, but they make their own food, and they make their own clothing, and their housing, and they farm their own lands, and they don't rely on society as much, other people, but they have a good relationship with those people. Whereas more organic solidarity is the opposite, really. It's where you rely on really people, strangers, for your needs, but you have a weak relationship with them, and you don't share the same beliefs, ideas, and values. For example, if I wanted to get a car, I would have to, I don't know how to make a car, that's for sure, so I'd have to go find somebody who does, and I wouldn't know that somebody very well, or I would not share their same ideas, I would not share their same beliefs and work ethics, most likely. So that's kind of a view of how organic solidarity was, and that was what was happening in the industrialization. And that was creating problems that caused depression, and these things can relate to suicide. And how so? It was the changes. So emile was another important idea that Durkheim had, and this does relate to the the suicidal type. But emile is, in society or individuals, a condition of instability resulting from a breakdown standards and values from a lack of purpose or ideas, or from a lack of purpose for standards or ideals. So when this industrialization was coming, society was making huge changes, and people were working in industries and stuff, and they were losing purpose to why they were doing this. I mean, they were making money, but that doesn't always, make for a good purpose and ideals. Their values were changing. Everything was happening so fast. In some cases, they were changing maybe into a good way or a bad way. For example, somebody might make a lot of money or break a lot of money, but this still was happening in them because they weren't used to it. They weren't adjusting to it very well yet. Or they were, but they were losing purpose for why they were doing it. And this created depression, or this could create depression, and that could lead to suicide, as Durkheim was able to discuss and realize. So you might be wondering, now that we kind of saw that, why he was so interested in all these things. Well, to say it out right now, it was really the time he lived in. Durkheim lived in a time where societies were changing everywhere, and people were just trying to adapt to this industrialization idea. And like I said, emile, and it just really was creating major changes in society that was resulting in suicide rates. And that's why he was really interested in suicide and all these other ideas and how society needs to work together in order to function. So that is really it for this presentation, guys. I do have the references here for my instructor and for any of the students if they would like to check it out. Just a little warning with the last one, Emile Durkeim, the video from study.com. That is a video that kind of will only let you see part of it for some really ridiculous reason. You will see most likely everything I talked about in the first couple, halfway, maybe a little over. But if you guys really want to see the video, I am not officially saying this, officially on YouTube, but there are add-ons you can find that can download this video. But yeah, so I would like to say thank you guys for watching. Thank you to my instructor for giving me some help and information about this presentation. And thank you for anybody who stayed watching through this video. I know it was a little bumpy, but I'm glad you guys watched it. And I hope you guys took out or learned something from it. All right, thank you guys.